Hello students, today we are going to study or I am going to explain you the 6th chapter of your supplementary reader, that is Vistas, and the name of the chapter is On the Face of It, written by Susan Hill. So before beginning with this chapter, I would like to discuss about the title. What is the meaning of this title, On the Face of It? On the face of it is a phrase, and in the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, it means or it is an informal expression used to say that something seems to be good, true, etc. But this opinion may need to be changed when you know more about it. That means an individual may be quite different from what we think of him or what he or she may apparently appear to be at first glance. There is the imperative need for us to view others by removing our glasses of prejudice, hatred, hearsay, and dislike. Or, in other words, we can say that the author wants to say that appearances are deceptive and we should not judge the people by the outward appearance, but the person is known or we can understand the person well only after spending some time with him, and we should judge the people by removing the glasses of prejudice and hatred, hearsay, or dislike. So now, before beginning with the explanation of the chapter, I would like to tell you about the author or give you a brief introduction of the author Susan Hill. So for Susan Hill, I must tell you that she is an English author of fiction and notification works, and her novels include The Woman in Black, The Mist in the Mirror, and I Am the King of the Castle, for which she received the Somerset Maugham Award in 1971. And this great writer Susan Hill was born in Scarborough, England in the year 1942. And she is a prolific writer and has authored many novels, collection of short stories and children's fiction. And she is a revered critic, reviewer and editor. She became interested in theatre at a very early age, and she liked the sound and smell of the theatre. She had to undergo tragic circumstances which include the death of her first partner, second child, and her own near death experience. And in her semi autobiographical novel named In the Springtime of the Year 1974, she talks a great deal about loss, sense of loneliness, and isolation, and is reminiscent of Derek, a little boy, in the play On the Face of It. So now this was about the author. Now I'll give you a brief introduction of this play On the Face of It. This play deals with the loss and sense of isolation and how an individual should deal with it. One must brave every situation or face every situation in one's life bravely and accept whatever comes one's way with aplomb, like Mr. Lamb does. Grumbling over our handicaps does not lead us anywhere. And Derek, who is a small boy in the play, a young lad of 14, was sinking in the abyss of despair and frustration and would have doomed himself in mental desolation, and had he not met Mr. Lamb, a physically challenged old man who had a positive outlook and attitude and who is ever ready to share his experiences with others and empowers them to live life fully. So this was a brief introduction of this play. Now we'll discuss the characters. What are the main characters of the play? The first main character is Mr. Lamb, who is a philanthropist to the core and is a compulsive do-gooder and he is always prepared to overlook the shortcomings and mischief of others. And believing that Derry has entered his garden stealthily or secretly with the intention of pinching apples, Mr. Lamb overlooks it, and he is more concerned that the boy should not trip over windfall crab apples and hurt himself. And in spite of the fact that one of his legs had got blown off during the war, and children sometimes make fun of him by calling him Lamey Lamb, and he always maintains a positive attitude towards life and accepts life as it comes without grumbling, and he simply ignores the children's teasing comments. So this was about Mr. Lamb, one of the main characters, and the other main character in the play is Derek or Derry, who is a complex toned lad of 14 years and who is a victim of an inferiority complex owing to accidental spilling of acid on one side of his face, and he always remains conscious of this handicap and is full of bitterness. And had he not met Mr. Lamb, he would have become a total psychological wreck. And in the beginning of the play, Derek gives the impression of being a spoilt brat as he tries to intimidate Mr. Lamb, whose garden he has trespassed or entered secretly. However, slowly and gradually, Derek's personality traits got unfolded, and we learn that most tortures psychological block for Derek results from the excessive importance he gives to the comments of others, as the part of his face, one side of his face was burned because of acid which gave him the ugly look, and he bears a grudge against the members of his family who, instead of encouraging him, always keep on pitying him. So this was about Derek. Now let's begin with the explanation of the play. Now let's begin with scene 1. So in this scene, this is the scene of Mr. Lamb's garden, and there is the occasional sound of bird song, of the trees rustling, and Derry's footsteps are heard as he walked slowly and tentatively through the long grass, and he pauses, then walks on again, and he comes round a screen of bushes so that when Mr. Lamb speaks to him, he is close at hand and Derry is startled. So here in this line, the word occasional means sometimes, rustling means whisper or low sound, tentatively means hesitantly without any confidence, and startled means feeling a sudden shock. So in these lines of introduction, the narrator describes the setting of scene 1. The location is Mr. Lamb's garden, and one can occasionally hear the birds singing and the low sound of the trees. And Derry, a young boy, enters the garden hesitantly, and when he comes out of the bushes, he is surprised to hear Mr. Lamb talking to him. Now we will read further. Now first Mr. Lamb words. Mind the apples. Derry. What? Who's that? Who's there? Mr. Lamb. Lamb's my name. Mind the apples. Crab apples those are. Windfalls in the long grass. You could trip. Derry. I thought this was an empty place. I didn't know there was anybody here. So in these lines, now Mr. Lamb warns Derry as he had entered into his garden, thinking the garden to be all alone and not owned by anyone. So he warns him about so Mr. Lamb warns Derry about the crab apples that usually fell in the long grass from the tree above, and Derry was shocked on hearing a voice, as he had not expected anyone in the garden, and he asked as to who it was. Then further, Mr. Lamb says, "That's all right, I'm here." "What are you afraid of, boy?" "That's all right." Derry, "I thought it was empty, an empty house." Mr. Lamb, "So it is, since I am out here in the garden. It is empty until I go back inside. In the meantime, I am out here and likely to stop. A day like this, beautiful day, not a day to be indoors." Derry, feeling panic, "I've got to go." Crab apples. What do you mean by the word crab apples in these lines? Crab apples are the small sour apples, and windfalls are the unexpected gain or jackpot. That is the apples which have fallen because of the blowing of the wind. So in these lines, now when when Derry asked that who it was on hearing the voice of Mr. Lamb, then Mr. Lamb introduced himself and also said that small sour apples known as crab apples had fallen on the ground, and if Derry would not be careful while walking through the grass, he could trip over them and get hurt. So Derry said that he didn't know that someone was present in the garden, and he thought it to be empty, and even the house seemed empty to him. Mr. Lamb tried to comfort him by saying that the house was empty as he was out in the garden, and he also asked him not to be afraid. Then Derry, he wanted to leave the place. Then further we'll see what happens. The next expression says, Mr. Lamb says that, "Not on my account. I don't mind who come into the garden. The gate's always open, only you climb the garden wall." Derry, "You were watching me?" Mr. Lamb, "I saw you, but the gate is open. All welcome, you are welcome. I sit here, I like sitting." Derry, "I'd not come to steal anything." Mr. Lamb, "No, no, the young lad steals, crumb the apples. You are not so young." Derry, "I just wanted to come into the garden." Mr. Lamb, "So you did. Here we are then." Derry, "You don't know who I am." Mr. Lamb, "A boy 13 or so." Derry, 14. Then he stops or pauses. "But I have got to go now. Goodbye." Mr. Lamb, "Nothing to be afraid of. Just a garden. Just me." Derry, "But I'm not. I'm not afraid. People are afraid of me." Mr. Lamb, "Why should that be?" Derry, "Everyone is. It doesn't matter who they are, or what they say, or how they look, how they pretend. I know, I can see." Mr. Lamb, "See what?" Derry, "What they think." Mr. Lamb, "What do they think then?" Derry, "You think." "What do they think then?" "Do you think, here's a boy, you look at me, and then you see my face and you think, that's bad. That's a terrible thing. That's the ugliest thing I ever saw. You think, poor boy, but I'm not poor. Underneath, you are afraid anybody would be. I am when I look in the mirror and see it. I am afraid of me." So here in these lines, the word scrum means steal from garden. Pretend means to behave as if something is true when you know that it is not. And underneath means directly below. So in all this conversation, the narrator wants to say that Mr. Lamb tried and to stop him and said that there was no need to leave the garden just because of him. So Mr. Lamb tried to comfort the little boy who is scared. As he entered the garden, he trespassed the garden secretly, thinking that the house was empty or there was no one in the garden, but to his surprise, he hears the voice of a man, and he turns to see that it was Mr. Lamb, who was a handicapped old man, and he, instead of shouting at him, he tried to comfort him and he was more concerned about the boy that he may not get hurt by tripping over the crab apples which had fallen from the tree. So Mr. Lamb, he tried to stop him and said that there is no need to leave the garden just because of him. And he also told him that he kept the gate open for people. It was only Derry who jumped the wall. And he did not want Derry to jump the wall but to come from the gate, which was always kept open. Then Derry got angry for being pointed at like that. And he also clarified that he hadn't come to steal anything from there, as he had trespassed the garden. So he tried to clarify, he tried to tell Mr. Lamb that he did not know that there was anyone over here, and he did not meant, or he had not come with the intention of stealing anything from there. Then Mr. Lamb agreed by saying that at many times apple had been stolen by the young boys, and according to him Derry was not so young, but still Derry wanted to leave, and Mr. Lamb told him not to be afraid of him and asked him to stay there for a while. And Derry told him that he was not afraid of everyone, and then he says rather people were afraid of him. Then Lamb asked him the reason for that, and he told him that he knew that people thought and how they behaved in front of him. Mr. Lamb questioned him about what others thought of him. Then Derry said that people got scared on seeing his face, as one side of his face was acid burnt and it looked very ugly, and some considered it bad or ugly, while some even took pity on him by saying that he was a poor boy. And he added that they were fake. Actually, they all were afraid of his face. So, and he even got scared of his own face when he looked into the mirror. And he added that Mr. Lamb will also pity him, but in his heart, he will also be scared of Derry. So, this highlights the inferiority complex of Derry. He had a complex of having a very an ugly face, and he feels that nobody would like him or like his face, as he looked very ugly and everybody pities him. Then further, the next conversation says, Mr. Lamb says, "No, not the whole of you, not of you." Derry, "Yes." Then he pauses. Mr. Lamb, "Later on, when it is a bit cooler, I'll get the ladder and a stick and pull down those crab apples. They are ripe of it. I make jelly. It's a good time of year. September, look at them, orange and golden. That's magic fruit. I often say, but it's best picked and made into jelly. You could give me a hand." Give me a hand means help me. Derry, "What have you changed the subject for? People always do that. Why don't you ask me? Why do you do what they all do and pretend it isn't true and isn't there? In case I see you looking and mind and get upset, I'll tell. You don't ask me because you are afraid too." Mr. Lamb, "You want me to ask? Say so then." Derry, "I don't like being with people, any people." Mr. Lamb, "I should say, to look at it, I should say, you got burned in a fire." Derry, "Not in a fire. I got acid all down that side of my face, and it burned it all away. I ate my face, and it ate my face up. It ate me up, and now it's like this, and it won't ever be any different." So in all this conversation, Mr. Lamb said that he was not afraid of Derry at all, and Derry was shocked to hear that, because of the inferiority complex he thought that everyone hated him. Then Mr. Lamb told him that he would bring a ladder and stick to pick fine and ripe crab apples, as they made jelly, a good jelly. And he also told him that in September they get ripe and become a magic fruit having orange and golden color. And he also asked him to join him in doing so, to help him in picking up the apples, and Derry pointed him for changing the topic just like other people did. And he added that Mr. Lamb didn't ask him about his face because he was afraid of asking about it. And Derry got annoyed and said that he did not like the company of people. Mr. Lamb guessed that maybe his face got burnt in some fire. Then Derry told him that it was due to acid that had burned half of his face. And he was so grieved, very sad, that he kept on repeating that acid ate his face and that it would never get cured. Then the the Mr. Lamb says no, and Derry says, "Aren't you interested, Mr. Lamb? You are a boy who came into the garden. Plenty do. I'm interested in anybody, anything. There's nothing God made that doesn't interest me. Look over there, over beside the far wall. What can you see?" Derry says, "Rubbish." Mr. Lamb. Mr. Lamb says, "Rubbish. Look, boy, look. What do you see?" Derry says, "Just grass and stuff, weeds." Mr. Lamb. "Some call them weeds. If you like, then a weed garden that. There's fruit and there are flowers and trees and herbs, all sorts. But over there, weeds. I grow weeds there. Why is one green growing plant called a weed and another flower? What's the difference? It's all life, growing, same as you and me." Then Derry says, "We are not the same." Mr. Lamb. "I am old, you are young. You have got a burned face, I have got a tin leg. Not important. You are standing there, I am sitting here. Where's the difference?" Derry. "Why have you got a tin leg?" Mr. Lamb. "Real one got blown off years back. Lamey lamb, some kids say. Haven't you heard them?" "You will." "Lamey lamb, it fits, doesn't trouble me." Derry. "But you can put on trousers and cover it up and no one sees. They don't have to notice and stare." Mr. Lamb. "Some do, some don't. They get tired of it in the end. There's plenty of other things to stare at." Derry. "Like my face." Mr. Lamb. "Like crab apples or weeds or a spider climbing up a silken ladder or my tall sunflowers." Weed. What are weeds here in these lines? Unwanted plants. And stare means to look at or to gaze at something continuously. So in these lines, Mr. Lamb did not agree with him at all with his words. Then Derry thought that he was not interested in his story. To this, Mr. Lamb said that he was interested in each and every creation of God. That means he is interested in all the creatures made by God. And he pointed out at a wall and asked him, what did he see beyond it? And Derry replied that there are weeds or unwanted plants. Mr. Lamb explained that there were a number of plants in the garden, and there were flowers, trees, and herbs. And some plants were considered good, and some were called unwanted plants. It was not because they were different. All of them were green in color, and it was about how people considered them to be herbs or weeds. That means it is the discrimination made by the people. In reality, they all were same, just like Derry and himself. So Derry did not agree to this. Mr. Lamb told him that there was no difference, and he was young and Mr. Lamb was old, and he had a burnt face and Mr. Lamb had a tin leg. These things are not so important. That means the handicap which you suffer from are not so important, and so they didn't make any difference. And Derry asked him the reason behind his tin leg, and he replied that it got damaged in an explosion many years ago. He also further says that kids teased him by calling him Lamey Lamb. And Derry said that he could cover his tin leg with his trousers so that no one could see. And Mr. Lamb said that it did not bother him much, as one day people would get tired of teasing him and would start discussing something else. And Derry showed his face in reply to Lamb's statement, and Mr. Lamb suggested that things like crab apples, weeds, spiders, and tall sunflowers could also be some of the other things that people would probably look at and discuss. So, in all the above conversation, we can say that Mr. Lamb does not know that Derek is a complex ridden lad, and so he is surprised when Derek reacts haughtily to the word afraid and tells him that people are afraid of him because of his ugly face, and one side of which got burned because of acid. And Mr. Lamb does not react as expected by the boy. Instead, he stays cool and tells Derek that he is going to make jelly out of ripe apples. However, Derek does not like this change of topic, and Mr. Lamb tries to build up the boy's confidence by telling him that he loves all creatures made by God, and nothing in this world is so worthless as it deserves to be considered as trash. Even weeds have their own value according to Mr. Lamb. So, in his words, there is a very deep meaning that whatever God has created in this world has its own value. Everything has a value. As you see in the rose flower, there is a thorn. So, thorn also has its own value. Why the thorn is there in the rose plant? In order to save it also has a value, and it is there for the purpose of saving the flower from being plucked by the people. So at this stage, Mr. Lamb tells him that he too is handicapped. Derry is and has an acid burned face, and Mr. Lamb says that he too is handicapped and has a tin leg because the real one had got blown off in the war. Now, whenever he goes out, children tease him by calling him Lamey Lamb. But he does not mind it. He does not feel bad. And he advises Derek to ignore people's comment. And Derek, however, is bursting with anger against this world and is critical of his mother also because he feels that she kisses him only on good side of the face. So we can say that Mr. Lamb tries to deal with the negative attitude of a lad in a very positive and advises him to think of the beautiful objects of the world. So we can say that this small boy, Derry, has a very tender and sensitive heart and has a deep longing to love and be loved. And although he suffers from an acute inferiority complex and a deep lack of self regard, he is strong enough to take things in his stride, and all he needs is a healing touch and a loving care in order to turn around and live his life fully. And fortunately, he meets Mr. Lamb and finds himself transformed. Or, in other words, we can say that the writer, through this play, wants to say that scars do not change a person and that handicaps must be accepted in life and society. Instead of fussing over Derek's scars or Mr. Lamb's artificial legs, people around them need to realize that too are as much human as they themselves are, and that if they are given time and space, they will do well in life. But it is unfortunate to see that people fail to realize the uniqueness of every human being, nay, every little creation of God, and thoughtlessly would scar and divide the world with war, hatred, prejudice, and indifference. On the face of it, all of us seem to be different, yet underneath we are the same. So, we can say that up till now, this play raises a pertinent question: when we all, when will we understand this, accept it, and conduct our lives accordingly? So now, this is all for today, and now we'll continue with the chapter in the next class. Thank you and goodbye.